The shrill ring of his cell phone shattered the silence of the night. Reaching for it with a pit in his stomach, John braced himself for the worst. "Hello." His voice trembled as he listened to the words that would change everything. "You have 24 hours to move that truck, or we're having it towed." John's heart raced. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not to the Medal of Honor recipient's truck. Time was running out. He had to act fast. John paced the living room, replaying the confrontation with the HOA president over and over again. How dare they demand he move the truck that belonged to his late war hero neighbor? This was more than just a truck. It was a sacred symbol of sacrifice and courage. The doorbell rang, sending a jolt of adrenaline through his body. Peering through the window, he recognized the familiar face of Mrs. Wilson, an elderly widow from down the street. Composing himself, he opened the door. "John, I heard about what's happening. Is there anything I can do to help?" Her kind eyes conveyed genuine concern. John sighed heavily. "I don't know what to do, Mrs. Wilson. They're giving me 24 hours to move the truck, or they'll have it towed." His voice cracked with emotion. This truck belonged to Mr. Erickson, the Medal of Honor recipient who lived next door. I promised him I'd look after it. Mrs. Wilson's expression softened. "Oh, John, I remember how much that truck meant to him. He was so proud of his service." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "We can't let them take it. Not after everything he did for this country." John nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "You're right. I have to fight this. Mr. Erickson deserves better than this." He glanced at the clock, its hands ticking away the precious hours. "I'm going to the HOA meeting tonight. I'm not going to let them bully me into getting rid of this truck." "I'll come with you," Mrs. Wilson said firmly. "We'll show them that we won't stand for this kind of disrespect." Together, they headed to the community center, John's heart racing with a mix of fear and resolve. As they entered the dimly lit room, he spotted the HOA president, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Jameson, presiding over the meeting. Taking a deep breath, John stepped forward, determined to defend the honor of his fallen neighbor's legacy. The room fell silent as John and Mrs. Wilson approached the front of the room. Mrs. Jameson's eyes narrowed as she recognized them. "John, Mrs. Wilson, what can we do for you this evening?" The condescension in her voice was palpable. John took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "Mrs. Jameson, I'm here because of the notice you sent me about the truck parked in my driveway. I need to understand why you're demanding I move it." Mrs. Jameson pursed her lips. "The truck is in violation of our community guidelines. It's an eyesore and takes up valuable space. We can't have it parked there indefinitely." John felt his blood boil. But this truck belonged to Mr. Erickson, the Medal of Honor recipient who lived next door. I promised him I'd look after it. A murmur rippled through the room, and John saw some of the residents exchange uneasy glances. Mrs. Jameson's expression hardened. "I'm aware of that, but the rules apply to everyone, regardless of who the vehicle belonged to. The truck needs to be moved, and that's not up for debate." Mrs. Wilson stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Mrs. Jameson, you can't be serious. Mr. Erickson gave his life for this country. Surely you can make an exception in his honor." The HOA president's gaze remained unwavering. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mrs. Wilson. The rules are the rules, and we have to be fair to all the residents." John clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Fair? How is it fair to disrespect the memory of a Medal of Honor recipient? This truck is a symbol of his sacrifice, and I won't let you take it away." The room erupted in murmurs and hushed whispers. Mrs. Jameson raised her hand, silencing the crowd. "Mr. Erickson's service is admirable, but that doesn't change the fact that the truck is in violation of our policies. You have 24 hours to remove it, or we'll have it towed at your expense." John felt his heart sink. He had to find a way to save the truck, but the odds were stacked against him. As he and Mrs. Wilson left the meeting, a sense of dread filled the air, and John knew he had to act fast to prevent the unthinkable from happening. The drive home was tense and silent. John's mind raced with possibilities, but each idea seemed more far-fetched than the last. As they pulled into the driveway, the imposing presence of the truck loomed before them, a bittersweet reminder of the man who once sat behind the wheel. "John, we can't give up." Mrs. Wilson's voice was firm, her eyes filled with determination. "Mr. Erickson deserves better than this." John nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "I know, but I'm not sure what to do. The HOA is being completely unreasonable." Mrs. Wilson reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "Then we'll have to get the community involved. This isn't just about a truck. It's about honoring a hero's legacy." An idea began to take shape in John's mind. "That's it. We need to rally the neighborhood, show them the importance of this truck and what it represents." His eyes lit up with determination. "If we can get enough people to support us, maybe we can change the HOA's mind." "I'll start calling everyone I know," Mrs. Wilson said, already reaching for her phone. "We need to act fast before the deadline." As the evening wore on, John and Mrs. Wilson worked tirelessly, reaching out to their neighbors and spreading the word about the impending threat to Mr. Erickson's truck. To their surprise, the response was overwhelming. One by one, residents began to show up at John's doorstep, expressing their outrage and pledging their support. The next day, the community center was packed with a sea of concerned citizens, all united in their desire to save the truck. John stood at the front of the room, his heart racing, as he addressed the HOA board. "This truck isn't just a vehicle. It's a symbol of the sacrifice made by one of our own. Mr. Erickson earned the Medal of Honor through his bravery and selflessness, and we owe it to him to honor his legacy." The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and John could see the HOA members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Jameson cleared her throat, her expression stoic. "We've heard your concerns, and we understand the significance of this truck. However, our policies can be changed," Mrs. Wilson interrupted, her voice firm. "This is about more than just a set of rules. It's about doing the right thing and showing respect for those who have served our country." The tension in the room was palpable as the HOA members exchanged uneasy glances. John held his breath, hoping that the collective plea of the community would sway them. After what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Jameson raised her hand, silencing the crowd. The air was thick with anticipation as she cleared her throat and addressed the room. "It's clear that this truck holds a special significance for our community." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of determined faces. "After careful consideration, the HOA board has decided to make an exception in this case." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, and John felt a surge of gratitude wash over him. Mrs. Wilson squeezed his arm, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Thank you, Mrs. Jameson," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means the world to me, and I know it would have meant everything to Mr. Erickson." The HOA president nodded solemnly. "We understand the importance of honoring those who have sacrificed for our country. The truck can remain in your driveway as a tribute to Mr. Erickson's memory." The room erupted in applause, and John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had won this battle, but he knew the fight to preserve Mr. Erickson's legacy was far from over. As the meeting adjourned, John and Mrs. Wilson were surrounded by their neighbors, each one offering their congratulations and expressing their admiration for the fallen hero. John couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude for the community he called home. Later that evening, as John sat alone in his living room, staring at the truck through the window, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would not let Mr. Erickson's sacrifice be forgotten, and he would do everything in his power to ensure that the truck remained a symbol of his courage and service. But just as he was about to turn away, a movement in the shadows outside caught his eye. Squinting, He could make out the silhouette of a figure lurking near the truck. John's heart raced as he rushed to the door, ready to confront the intruder. As he stepped outside, the cool night air hit his face, and he was met with the sight of a familiar figure. Mrs. Jameson, the HOA president, standing beside the truck, her gaze fixed on the license plate. John's heart pounded in his chest as he approached Mrs. Jameson, unsure of what to make of her late-night presence near the truck. Mrs. Jameson. His voice was cautious, yet filled with a hint of accusation. "What are you doing out here?" The HOA president turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "John, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said at the meeting." John crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "About honoring Mr. Erickson's legacy." Mrs. Jameson nodded, her gaze drifting back to the truck. "I've lived in this community for over 20 years, and I've never heard a story quite like his." She paused, a wistful look crossing her face. "My own son served overseas, and I can only imagine the pain his family must have felt." John felt a flicker of empathy, his initial suspicion softening. "Mrs. Jameson, I know the rules are important to you, but this truck means so much more than just an eyesore or a parking violation." "I realize that now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you spoke about Mr. Erickson's sacrifice, it struck a chord with me. I couldn't just ignore that." John took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. "So, what changed your mind?" Mrs. Jameson sighed heavily. "I've been thinking a lot about the true meaning of community and how sometimes we get so caught up in the rules that we forget what's really important." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "Honoring those who have served our country, that should be more important than any policy or guideline." John felt a surge of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Mrs. Jameson. I know this couldn't have been an easy decision for you." The HOA president offered him a small smile. "It wasn't, but I realize now that some things are worth fighting for, even if they don't fit neatly into our guidelines." She glanced back at the truck, her expression softening. "Mr. Erickson deserves to have his memory honored, and I'm glad we can make that happen." John nodded, a newfound respect for Mrs. Jameson blossoming in his heart. "I appreciate your willingness to reconsider. I know Mr. Erickson would be grateful too." As they parted ways, John couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and pride. The community had come together to defend a fallen hero's legacy, and in the process, they had discovered the true meaning of what it meant to be a neighbor. But as John settled back into his home, a nagging thought crept into his mind. What if this wasn't the end of the story? What if there were others out there who still sought to disrespect Mr. Erickson's memory? The next few days passed in a blur of activity as John and the community worked to ensure the truck's protection. Neighbors took turns keeping watch, and a small memorial began to take shape around the vehicle, adorned with flowers, flags, and handwritten notes of gratitude. John felt a swell of pride as he surveyed the scene, knowing that Mr. Erickson's legacy would live on in the hearts of those who had rallied to defend it. But just as he was about to turn away, a familiar car pulled into the driveway, its occupant stepping out with a determined expression. It was Mrs. Jameson, and she was not alone. Trailing behind her was a group of what appeared to be contractors, their tools and equipment in tow. John's heart sank as he hurried to meet them, 1,000 scenarios racing through his mind. "Mrs. Jameson, what's going on?" The HOA president held up a hand, her gaze stern. "John, I need to speak with you. There's been a development." John felt the color drain from his face. "What kind of development?" Mrs. Jameson glanced over her shoulder at the contractors, who were already beginning to set up around the truck. "I'm afraid we've received a complaint from one of the residents. They're claiming the memorial is a violation of our community guidelines." John's jaw tightened, a surge of anger coursing through him. "What? After everything we went through, you're going to let them do this?" Mrs. Jameson's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "I'm afraid I don't have a choice, John. The complaint has been filed, and the board has to take action. John shook his head in disbelief. But this is about honoring a hero, not some petty dispute over community rules. I know, and I wish I could do more, Mrs. Jameson said, her voice tinged with regret. But the bylaws are clear. If a resident files a formal complaint, we have to investigate it. John felt the weight of the situation crashing down on him. Just when he thought they had won, another obstacle had emerged, threatening to undo everything they had fought for. As the contractors began to dismantle the memorial, John watched in anguish, his heart breaking for the lost opportunity to truly honor Mr. Erickson's sacrifice. He knew he had to do something, but the odds seemed stacked against him once again. John stood in the driveway, his fists clenched in frustration as the contractors systematically dismantled the memorial. Mrs. Wilson, who had been keeping vigil, approached him, her eyes filled with sorrow. John, we can't let them do this. Not after everything we fought for. Her voice trembled with emotion. John nodded, his mind racing to find a solution. I know, Mrs. Wilson. But the HOA has their hands tied. They have to follow the rules, even if it means disrespecting Mr. Erickson's legacy. Suddenly, an idea struck him. Wait, that's it. He turned to Mrs. Jameson, who was overseeing the proceedings with a heavy heart. Mrs. Jameson, what if we can get the resident who filed the complaint to withdraw it? The HOA president's eyes widened. That would certainly change things, but I'm not sure how realistic that is. Who would be willing to go against their own complaint? John's gaze swept across the gathering crowd of neighbors who had been drawn to the scene by the commotion. Maybe one of them knows the resident who filed the complaint. If we can appeal to their sense of community, perhaps they'll be willing to reconsider. Mrs. Jameson contemplated the idea, her brow furrowed. It's worth a try, I suppose. But time is of the essence. The contractors will have the memorial dismantled within the hour. John nodded, his determination fueling his actions. Then let's not waste a second. Mrs. Wilson, can you start asking around? See if anyone knows who filed the complaint. Of course, John. I'll get right on it. Mrs. Wilson hurried off, her steps quickened by the urgency of the situation. As John watched her disappear into the crowd, he turned to Mrs. Jameson, his gaze unwavering. We can't let them take this away from us, Mrs. Jameson. Mr. Erickson deserves better. The HOA president's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. I agree, John. I'll do everything in my power to help you save this memorial. Together, they joined the growing throng of neighbors, each one united in their mission to preserve the legacy of the fallen hero. Time was ticking, but John knew that with the community behind him, they had a fighting chance. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air was palpable. John and Mrs. Wilson scurried from one neighbor to the next, urgently pleading for information of the resident who had filed the complaint. Suddenly, a familiar face emerged from the crowd. It was Mrs. Daniels, a retired school teacher who had been a longtime resident of the community. Mrs. Daniels. John rushed to her side, his eyes filled with hope. Do you know anything about the resident who filed the complaint against the memorial? The elderly woman pursed her lips, a conflicted expression crossing her face. I'm afraid I do, John. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Brewer. John's heart sank. Mrs. Brewer? But why would she do that? Mrs. Daniels sighed heavily. She's been complaining about the memorial for days, saying it's an eyesore and a distraction. I tried to reason with her, but she's as stubborn as they come. John felt a surge of frustration. This can't be happening. We have to convince her to withdraw the complaint before they dismantle the whole thing. Mrs. Daniels nodded. I'll talk to her, John. She and I have been neighbors for years. Maybe I can get through to her. Without a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Daniels hurried towards the edge of the crowd, where a stern-faced woman stood observing the proceedings. John watched, holding his breath, as the two women engaged in a heated discussion. Mrs. Daniels gesticulated wildly, her expression pleading, while Mrs. Brewer's face remained set in a stubborn scowl. The confrontation seemed to last an eternity, but just as the contractors were about to remove the final piece of the memorial, Mrs. Brewer's expression softened. She nodded slowly, and Mrs. Daniels turned towards John, a triumphant smile on her face. "She's agreed to withdraw the complaint," Mrs. Daniels announced, drawing a collective sigh of relief from the crowd. John felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he watched the contractors pack up their equipment and retreat. The memorial still stood, a testament to the community's unwavering determination to honor Mr. Erickson's legacy. As the sun began to set, John and his neighbors gathered around the truck, their eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that the fight was not over, that there would be other challenges and obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, they were united in their commitment to preserve the memory of a fallen hero, a symbol of the sacrifices that had secured their freedom.